Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our 1 hour webinar on our turnover of the first quarter for Thermador Groupe in 2025. You've already been informed through our letters to shareholders, 119, which you can see on the site, or you'll have received digitally already. This presentation is translated simultaneously by a real person, not by AI. So it's Neil that is doing that for our Anglo-Saxon investors. And to remind you, you'll be able to ask your questions in French and in English. As usual, we'll start by talking about headcount, which is stable for the first quarter with 824 people. Reminder, there were 821 at the end of 2024. So it's pretty stable, which is not surprising given the difficulties encountered in terms of turnover and profit last year. And you're going to see through the communications from the AGM that this beginning of this year is difficult too. So a few key moments. First of all, in terms of MaPrimeRénov' government funding mechanism. So for this first quarter, most projects are blocked, primarily because of the problem with the budget, the French government budget. It's taken a few weeks for them to get to an agreement on the budget. And so there's a bottleneck on a certain number of projects for energy renovation. So now we have this bottleneck in terms of processing the applications. So that explains the poor turnover for Thermador in the first group. That's our subsidiary, Thermador, of course. However, what do we see for the CEE certificates? These are energy efficiency certificates provided by private industry. This is promising for tertiary and commercial properties. In terms of new builds, we've got 2 months. We've had slightly better news about new building starts. We'll see those figures a little later. So that suggests a recovery on that market during 2025, and that will probably bring a positive result for our companies, our subsidiaries concerned in the market in 2026. We talk a lot about these in this market, but of course it's only 10% of our turnover is affected by that market. So the DIY market is difficult. It's negative again for the beginning of this year, after a negative year in 2024. However, we've got real hopes of concluding the 2 deals we've got in progress with C2AI in the Rhône-Alpes region, which have complementary activities with District Labo and Sectoriel. Just to remind you, this company does more than 10 million turnover and employs 45 people. There's also Kilinox, and you've read about that in our press release. They're based in Spain, and that will allow us to increase our turnover abroad. So turnover above 14 million and 40 employees, and that's directly at industry, and in particular pharmaceutical industry and agro foods and bio organic. And that's the type of target we're looking for abroad in particular. A look at the figures. So you can see the curves over a long period for new housing starts in orange and building permits granted in blue. You'll see that at the end of last year we had this slight upturn for housing starts, so that gives us good prospects for 2026, I would say, and we're hoping for better figures in 2025, and we'll continue to give these statistics regularly. And then we're going to look at the Coedis figures. They have all the figures for the industry supplying heating and air conditioning equipment. And you can see that turnover is down minus 6.2, and even in January, and minus 9.6 in February. And then the second group is INOA, which is another association. This is DIY, and they supply DIY superstores, and it's negative in January, minus 2.2% turnover, and then minus 5.7% in February. Now, a look at the price effect. So over 5 years, we see the price effect. In blue, we've got our organic growth in turnover, and in dark blue, the volume effect. So you see that after peak of inflation in 2022 and negative inflation in 2024, minus 13.5, minus 2.6, we see that 2025 we have a less negative trend, but we've still got minus 2.1% in terms of price effect. And you'll see once again in our shareholders letter, when we give the breakdown by company. So retail segment are 3 companies which have a consolidated drop of 11.2% on the Pro channel, and on the Pro channel minus 8.3%. Retail counts for more than 17% of the turnover of the group, and that's an overall amount of minus 8.8%. And we'll talk about prospects a little later, at the outlook a little later. In this first part of the year, and you'll see in our letters on page 1 of the newsletter, all the companies from Sirocco are those companies that are involved in industry, and you'll see that those companies have better resilience in terms of turnover than the companies higher up the table, which are either in building focused or DIY. A little reminder of our long-term growth objectives. This is a chart just to remind you that we're now behind that 10-year strategy, whereas in 2023 we were well ahead of the curve. But the integration of C2AI and Kilinox should allow us to catch up on our 10-year strategy over the medium term. Patricia, could you give us your impressions on the financial aspects of our business? So we're going to start with the file structure, and this was talked about at the AGM and the publication of our financial reports. So we have a cash position, record cash position in 2024 of 63.3 million. And this is a result of the good practices that we've adopted in our financial operations. And now we're up to 66.3 million. If you compare that to 2024, this cash position was around 45 million. So, just to remind you, the payment of the dividends is in mid-April. So this amount of 19.1 million will be deducted, but that will be seen, of course, in the second quarter. So why do we have this record position? I'm going to make a link with the situation in terms of stock at the end of 2024, and that will show us why this position is so good. Stock was quite high because it was 213 days of purchase at the end of 2024. A lot of merchandise on boats, part of it paid, part of it not paid yet. And this configuration, we can imagine that our cash position would be down at the end of March because we've also got a drop in turnover and a level of stock to pay. Logically, you would imagine it to be lower. So 66.3 million is a result of the good management of our finances and our stocks. Another key element is our net debt position. So cash position minus debt. We've got no new loans in 2025. We continue to reverse our loans, and so at the end of March we've got an improved positive debt position of 32.8 million. So this cash allows us to finance our investments, our planned investments, capex. So in 2024 we were 3.6 million for this year, real estate acquisition of an additional building in the Saint-Quentin-Fallavier area where most of our subsidiaries are. And that will cover certain needs, either subsidiaries who need more space, more stock, or external growth, of course, where we may need to accommodate additional people. With Atomitering, it's been the case when we've allocated people from that company. And in the 3.5 million, there's also a part which is a bigger project over 3 years. That's the automation project for Sferaco, for building and industry. It's a company which has made a certain of acquisitions of subsidiaries and of businesses, and it's a company that now needs to automate its stocks and its logistics, and it will allow it to deliver valves to Sectorial and Saveco, other subsidiary, and that just makes this automation project even more important to uphold this fine level of service in terms of operationality. So this is an overall investment of 6 million euros, which concerns the automation projects 2 + 2 + 2 over a period of 3 years, and the 2.9 million investment for the logistics premises, so real estate, and that will be operational in 2027. So that's cash. Now, in terms of estimates, and now I can pass back over to Guillaume to talk about the share. So we're talking about the share reinvested over the last 10 years, and in spite of the very chaotic situation at the moment created by Mr. Trump and his administration, Groupe Thermador is resisting fairly well in terms of the share price, and we've got a return of 9.4% per year over the past 10 years, compares favorably to the CAC 40 at 6.6% per year and the CAC MNS, which is at 3.8%. Okay, moving on to outlooks in terms of new builds. Even if this trend does prove to be the case, we'll have to wait for this to have a positive impact for PP tube and thermochrome. We can't imagine that happening over 2025, but it'll be more likely to be 2026 because of the time lag between the delivery of new homes and the installation of products from PP tube and thermochrome. MaPrimeRénov', the budgets have been reduced for 2025 for these government grants. We are part of that process as citizens, and we see that we're at around 3 billion in 2024. The budget which is allocated to this is reduced down to 2.1 billion euros for 2025. The water cycle. Okay, so we're looking upwards to the heavens and hoping we'll get more sunshine than we had last year, and less rain, because of course that affects our watering pumps market. So Audria, who is in the DIY sector, and Jetly, who are in the pro sector, B2B. Now you may remember that we lost 6.5 million turnover last year because of this very rainy spring in 2024. For industry then, the outlook is better, partly because of the PMI register, the Production Managers Index, shows that the tendency is improving, and also because of consultations that are in progress in France and Europe on projects, suggest that we are looking forward to a better year in 2025 in those industrial markets. Geopolitics then. This is a big chapter, of course, but I'll be brief. First of all, we confirm that we are not directly impacted by changes with US suppliers, and therefore not affected by the tariffs which may exist between the US and France, Europe. For information, we directly buy 0.17% in terms of value of our supplies from the US, so it's negligible. However, the uncertainty caused by the US has created big changes in euro-dollar exchange rates, which Patricia is very well aware of. And for the moment, we purchase in dollars are protected. The real question, of course, concerns interest rates through its different projects. Metals, sorry, not rates, metals. We buy a lot of metals, the Thermador Groupe, aluminium, nickel and copper, and the metal prices are pretty erratic and they could go up or down depending on the decisions that come out of the White House and from China on the tariffs. And we do buy from metals, and in the other direction, metals, scrap metal goes the other way and can be taxed as well, so those prices could rise too. Internationally now, we look forward to Quilinox's integration into Thermador, so we're focusing really on those two acquisitions for the moment. And we don't have any new projects in the pipe. Of course, we're open to any opportunities, but for the moment, there's no additional projects after the Quilinox project internationally. In terms of prices, I'm going to be very humble on this subject and say nothing and make no predictions, because our past guesses have been wrong. So we won't be making any forecasts, and we will just continue to give you the quarterly data in terms of those prices. Just to remind you, for the first, we were at minus 2.1% over the first quarter. And finally, we started with headcount. We'll finish with headcount because I'll just remind you too that 820 people at the end of 2024, and with the acquisition of those two companies, C2A1 and Kinox, will take us above 900, and imagine that we can imagine the group going above 1,000 people. And we have to be very careful in terms of European regulations, which has been in terms of CSRD for extra financial reporting, which is lighter and that's called CSRD, and that's less complex for companies under 1,000 employees. Finally, look to the past, to look to the future. We see that the quarterly trend in terms of organic growth or contraction. We see that the first quarter of 2025, the situation is improving, although it's still negative. So we see that the return to a balanced position is still slightly distant, but we hope we might see a bit of blue on that bar chart in 2020, in the second quarter, by the end of the first half of 2024. So I've got one question already. So you've got chat and questions. So John Florent asked the question: in your evolution of volumes for 2021 to 2021, what is the year 2025? Is this a prospective information or something you've observed over the first 3 months? Yeah, so we've seen a distribution between volumes and price impact, which gives the trend for the turnover, which is minus 8.1% in terms of organic growth. Any questions on the buyback of shares? We've got a question about that. If you can focus your questions on the questions tab, it makes it easy to process. So are we thinking about buying back shares to support the title, as we to support the share? We talked about that during the AGM. There's probably something will be done in 2025. And as soon as we decide to do anything, we'll of course tell you by press release. But to remind you, last year we bought 30,000 shares. But the objective is not to manage the share, because it's difficult to prevent a big movement of the movements of the stock exchange. We would not be able to fight against a big movement on the stock exchange, either upwards or downwards, of course. So the objective would be to use any shares we buy in the future either for long-term remunerations. That was one of the resolutions that was voted at the AGM, or as an element of a deal. So we've fixed a maximum price for a buyback of shares at €99. And we've put a maximum of 3% of shares. So why do you buy buildings rather than rent them? Because it allows us, and we've seen during the periods where we had strong growth and we had a lot of stock, it allowed us to adjust the buildings that we had to distribute them more easily between the subsidiaries. If we were tenants in those buildings, it would be much more complicated. And so, if we, in terms of stock, the fact that we own the buildings, it allows us to adapt our storage to the needs of our companies. We had this example with the lithium batteries, and finally, that means that we generally adapt to the needs of our subsidiaries more easily than if we'd been tenants. And the other element, it's an element. These are assets, of course. 89 million is the value of our real estate. That was the historic choice, was of course to be here in the Saint-Quentin-Fallavier area, and it's a good dynamic, I would say, for the company. So we continue with this policy. But we notice that when we buy companies into external growth, they tend to rent their premises. So we'll continue to purchase our real estate, and you'll see in our books that we have the valuation of all our property, part of it as assets and the other part of it in debt. So it's pretty transparent. I would also like to remind you that our subsidiaries pay rents, which are market rates, and the company Thermador is our property company working in normal market conditions. And also I'll remind you that Thermador is 100% owned by Thermador Groupe, and therefore 100% owned by these shareholders of Thermador Groupe. So I have a question about the acquisitions of 4 companies that were planned last year in terms of acquisitions. I think you're making a mistake there. We only mentioned 3 projects actually, and that one of the 3 projects was abandoned. We clearly communicated on that subject, and that we were only talking about 2 projects. The 3rd project did not go to the end. I can't explain why. It's a confidential project, but as I said earlier on, we are optimistic about going to the end of those projects, but there are no other projects of those 2 projects, but there are no other projects in progress. Also, in terms of owning our buildings, it has allowed us to install photovoltaic panels, install trackers, or another energy efficient solution. It allows to accelerate the energy efficiency of our buildings, and we see that when we're tenants, in order to try to work on energy efficiency, there's much more resistance from the owners of the property. As owners of our property, we're able to move more quickly on our energy efficiency projects. We've already in 2024 made a savings of 1 million euros. I've got a question from Jean Florent. Wants a more detailed explanation on the net debt. So could you remind us what was the net debt at the 31st of December 24, and how has it evolved to the end of the first quarter? At the end of 2024, we had 32.8 with our bank debt. At the end of March, we've added 3 million euros of cash more. So we had 35.8 million net debt at the end of March. But of course, we're paying the dividends in March, which is 19.1 million. So those have to be taken off, of course, that 35.8 million. To be clear, our positive net debt means that we have no debt in reality. We've got more cash than we have debt, and by quite a lot. We could, if we wanted, pay off our bank debts, our bank loans, immediately, but we don't do that because we've got very interesting conditions with the banks. We negotiated beneficial conditions, and in 2024 we were able to generate 1.5 million euros of property profit. So Elias has a question about Axelair. How has it been able to continue to progress, even though it's been negative in terms of its results over all this time? I think it's quite a pertinent question. Indeed, Axelair has made a good start to the year in terms of turnover in a difficult market with big competitors and very present on the market. The error that we made at the beginning when we took on this company was the estimation of the structures we would need to attack the market and in the end meet customer needs. In reality, the level of service to be provided to the customer is very high and requires a lot of human resources for a company which is really a startup. So that explains why the structure we set up at the beginning allowed us to get past the profitability threshold over in the first 5 years, and now we have a structure which is still pretty heavy in terms of the turnover that the company generates. So the strategy or the outlook that we have for our Axelair is good management, and the company managers are particularly mobilized with the executive committee to plan the best possible management to get to the break-even point as quickly as possible, but whilst continue to develop turnover in such a way as to make the profitability of Axelair secure over the long term. As you know, in Thermador, when we start a new company, you have to get a certain level of turnover in order to ensure profitability. Now we realise that given the requirements of the market, we need a turnover of around 10 million euros to reach that break-even point. So we feel that this participation, Axelair's participation in the ventilation market, is a good complement to the rest of our businesses, and it's linked, of course, to the heating and cooling of buildings in France. And that's resulted in an increase in capital in 2024 for 1.5 million, because we needed cash for that subsidiary. So that's what we did in 2024, and then there was also development choices that were made, and more towards mobile, in terms of mobile ventilation, and that explains why we had to work on the stock levels and absorb the losses from 2024 and 2023. So we're giving them, Axelair, the means to be ready for this ventilation market with creation of products and the known Axelair brands and sales team which who are visiting their customers and trying to get it themselves referenced with major distributors. a question on the French. I've got no more on the French webinar. Have you got any on any English questions, Patricia? Not for the moment. 74 participants listening at the moment. So maybe we could talk about our dollar exposure, which is what we presented to a number of institutional investors. We've got a fairly cautious strategy. We hedge over 3 and 6 months and up to 1 year against fluctuations in the euro-dollar rate. And what we decided to do in 2025 was to benefit from the strong variation in rates. And so we had this objective to hedge against this. We have to pay for it, of course, but we have to see what we're going to do for the second half year, because our engagements there are for the first half years. And our subsidiaries, of course, need to know, because they're paying dollars, what the rate they're going to be paying. So it's a key element, which these are levers which you can use to optimize our position. So Loic congratulates us for our management. That's part of the prudent judgment. Management is part of the group's DNA. And I would remind you that the company executives and employees are shareholders, and so of course we are committed to the results, and we're implicated in the results of the company. And Loic says that the euro-dollar parity is going to affect our purchasing. But of course, we've got high levels of stock, so it's something which is slightly longer term in terms of the effect that will have on our what the exchange rate would have on our rates. Just to remind you, 2/3 of our purchases are in euros at the moment. For more than 48% private shareholders in the group. And so there's a movement at the end of December, and now there is a lot of private investment. So it's 48.6% of private shareholders, with the founders who remain present in that group. And so that's about 53 or 54% who hold those shares. I'm just going to check. 55%. So 54%. 48.3% of institutional, 10% by the board of directors, the executive committee, and the employees and the former employees. Jean-Florent, I would ask you to open our URD, Universal Registration document, which we always make an effort to print and very quickly every year. And you'll see that on page 54, 55, you'll see that this changed last year. Last year, we now have the highest level of private shareholders in the Paris Stock Exchange, and I'm pretty proud of that, as you can imagine. No, we're not up to the level of Air Liquide. Jean-Pierre has a question. So how do you explain that all is relative, that the employees were failing? A lot of employees rejected the resolutions at the AGM. So just to explain that we do have meetings with the employees before the AGM. So there's 2 meetings, so that gives them so they get the messages first, and then after these presentation meetings. We have a vote for the members of the mutual fund, the FCPE of Thermador Groupe, and they vote they own 4.65% of the capital. No, 3%. Sorry, 3.5% of the capital. And during that vote, members, we work through the resolutions, and we continue to communicate their votes during the AGM. Jean-Pierre talks at a major a level of rejection which is fairly high. I think it's relative. I think it's probably maybe 20% the highest. It's not exactly high. And there are always resolutions which talk about money, dividends in terms of remuneration of the executives, and the allocation of performance shares. I think see things a little differently. I think it's it's a teaching process. It's important for all the stakeholders to understand how these things work, and I think it's fairly high level, I would say, of agreement with those topics. So the question of Jean-Pierre is his question is: are people more anti than they were last year in terms of the employees, the members of the SCP? I would say no, it's not the case, because the disagreement is about 20% for the allocation of performance shares, for example, the resolution. And that was an improvement on the previous year because of our pedagogical approach. We've tried to provide more information to the employees so they understand how it works. This is a democratic process, and it's important for us to instruct employees. And this approach that we have at the AGM is quite original. There's a question about stock levels, given the current context. These are real elements which are dealt with subsidiary by subsidiary. The only thing that we look at is the level of cash, so indirectly their management of their working capital requirement. And for the moment, there's no 213 days is not the and we think our WCR should be around 35%. So we're a bit higher than that, 40 point something percent, but we continue to work on that. And this work on stock levels is something we did in 2023, 2024. We asked our subsidiaries look at their stock levels and see if economies could be made, savings could be made, and each subsidiary worked on that, on their stock levels, and also on the level of service, of course, that they provide to the customers, because that's one of the performance indicators by which we measure them. As a priority, our priority is to provide service to the customer. So before we talk about stock levels, the real priority is to ensure we look after the customer, and with short delivery times. And we during these difficult times in particular, we try to keep good relations with our suppliers, and we will tend to stay with our suppliers when times are good, times are bad. So the subsidiaries, of course, they may pay interest on stock that's held for too long. So, of course, in terms of good management, they are looking after their stock levels. Just to refer to our conditions of working and living working conditions in the group, We have a survey every 3 years, and there are 50 or so questions on a lot of different topics. And then we have a result which comes out for the group, which is interesting to look subsidiary by subsidiary to ensure that the directors of the subsidiaries can use the survey to measure the labour relations, if you like, in their subsidiaries. What we talked about the AGM was an improvement in our last year compared to previous surveys. The situation was better in 2024 than previously. So, Jean-Pierre, so do you have competitors in France, or yes, we've got loads of competitors in Europe who work in France. Almost all the European or all the European players are on the French market. If you're a distributor or manufacturer, European manufacturer or distributor, you're bound to take an interest in all those countries: Belgium, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, and even Poland today, which is a country that's using a lot of, is very active in our markets. And so a lot of our competitors are European competitors who are present in France. A question from Jean-Pierre. What was communicated at the AGM was that the members of the FCPE were consulted. So it was up to those present at the AGM who were voting on behalf of the employees. If, for example, 80% of the employees were for a resolution, they would vote for it. So you got the votes of all the FCPE members who give the tenants, and their representatives then go to the AGM. There's 2 employees in that position, and they decide according to the poll. It seemed pertinent to give you an idea of the labour relations within the group for this vote, which has no impact on the resolutions of the annual general meeting, but it's interesting for you to see it. So last year we took the votes cast by the employees and by the representative of the employees, and they indeed voted against one of the resolutions. So it's a real transparent process. That's what we see it. We see it that way. So I think we've finished with the questions on the French side. Anything on the English side, Patricia? New question from. So your purchases, do they come from China, and do you pay for those supplies in dollars? Yeah, of course. Everything that comes from Asia is mostly paid in US dollars. A tiny bit paid in yuan. But we do keep an eye on the Chinese currency. We don't have hedging for that. We have no cover. But if you look at companies, our subsidiaries buy cash, so there's no. You'll find these elements on page 15 of the RD. You'll see the other currencies represent 2%, and the yuan, the Chinese yuan, is part of that 2%. We did realize that the Chinese government could use its currency to support its competitivity, but the trend, I think, in terms of the euro yuan is also favourable to the euro, with a stronger position of the euro compared to the Chinese currency. But longer term, of course, there can be a deflationist effect in the longer term. a deflationary effect. Sorry. Last question from Loic. The fact of encouraging people to buy heat pumps for the future, replacing fuel, domestic fuel and gas. How does that affect Thermador, and what percentage of our turnover? So we don't give percentages for the heat pump because that heat pump activity. We don't want to give that information to our competitors. But the subsidiaries, our subsidiaries don't sell heat pumps. We sell accessories. So Thermador Groupe is a specialist of accessories, and the same applies to heat pumps. I think we have the number one position in France in terms of heat pump accessories for professional applications. So it's a big part of Thermador's turnover, which has developed a lot over recent years. You'll see that on the graph in chapter 5. You've got the turnover over a period of 10 years for each of our subsidiaries. Page 162, you'll see 51 million in 2020 to 106 million in 2021. So very fast growth in terms of turnover. Most of that from heat pump accessories and accessories for solar panels, and you'll see the impact of those products on our on Thermador Groupe's turnover. And Isocell also gets from some of its turnover by working with manufacturers of heat pumps. I see Loic's having a good day. What's the impact of copper on our purchases? A lot of our products are made using copper, brass and copper, but the number of tons of brass and copper, this is not consolidated data, so we'd have to look at each item and have the exact weight of brass or copper, and then consolidate that with the throughout the whole group. But we'll be doing that in the future to check the long-term impact. We call it red metal. Will become more and more rare and more expensive. Like drinking water, the long-term trend will be that. And also, I think it's important to be clear with our shareholders and tell them our position in respect of these materials, which will be in short supply in the future. For information again, the vast majority of our projects and the vast majority of products sold by Thermador Groupe are made from recycled metals. So most of the suppliers of copper turn towards the recycling market themselves. There's very highly regulated market, of course, because there has to be a guarantee of quality of product, of course. Okay. Loic thanks me for the transparent way we answered those questions. That's part of the DNA of the group. I would say, Loic, thank you for your comment. Okay, well, it's 6:54. We have no more questions. We have no more questions. Just like to wish you a pleasant evening. I'd like to thank Neil for accompanying us in English, the Opaline team behind the glass over there, and they're always there helping us to looking after the minor technical problems we sometimes have, but we've had none today. So thank you to Ditouan and Adrien and François Xavier, is upstairs in the opening offices for your work as a moderator for this session. So thank you to all of you, and good evening to all of you. Bye-bye.